In the vast wilderness of Wyoming Territory, 1878, where justice was often decided by the fastest gun and mercy was considered a luxury few could afford, one rancher's encounter with a trembling young woman would ignite a chain of events that would shake the foundations of an entire community. This is the extraordinary true story of how a plea whispered in desperation, "Sir, don't let them hurt me again," led to a stand against cruelty that would be remembered for generations. Before we dive into this gripping tale of courage and justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you believe in standing up for the defenseless. What you're about to witness will show you what happens when one person decides that enough is enough. The desperate plea, the bitter wind swept across the sagebrush plains of Wyoming Territory, carrying with it the promise of an early winter in October 1878. Garrett Blackwood pulled his coat tighter as he rode his horse along the fence line of his sprawling cattle ranch, checking for breaks that might let his herd wander into the dangerous ravines that scarred the landscape. At 35, Garrett was a man shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life. Standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work, he had the weathered appearance of someone who had carved his existence from an unforgiving land. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his green eyes held the steady gaze of a man who had learned to judge character quickly and accurately. Garrett's ranch, the Diamond B, encompassed nearly 3,000 acres of prime grazing land in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains. He had built it from nothing over the past decade, starting with a handful of cattle and a determination to succeed that had sustained him through droughts, harsh winters, and occasional conflicts with rustlers. Unlike many of his neighbors, Garrett ran his operation with a firm but fair hand. He paid his ranch hands decent wages, treated them with respect, and had earned a reputation throughout Johnson County as a man whose word was his bond. As he approached a grove of cottonwood trees near a small creek, Garrett's horse suddenly shied, ears flicking nervously. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle secured to his saddle as he scanned the area for whatever had spooked the animal. Then he heard it, a soft, whimpering sound, barely audible above the whisper of wind through the trees. Dismounting carefully, Garrett approached the sound with the cautious movements of a man who had survived 10 years on the frontier by never taking anything for granted. What he found among the fallen leaves and shadows made his blood run cold. Huddled against the base of a large cottonwood was a young woman, probably no more than 19 or 20 years old. Her dress was torn and dirty, her brown hair disheveled, and her face bore the unmistakable marks of recent violence, a blackened eye, split lip, and bruises along her jawline that were already turning purple. But it was the look in her eyes that hit Garrett like a physical blow. He had seen that expression before, in the eyes of wounded animals and broken men, the hollow stare of someone who had endured more pain than the human spirit should have to bear. "Ma'am," Garrett said gently, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her further. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The young woman looked up at him with those haunted eyes, and Garrett could see her trying to determine whether he represented salvation or another threat. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, cracked with pain and exhaustion. "Sir, don't let them hurt me again." The simple plea, spoken with such desperate vulnerability, struck Garrett with the force of a lightning bolt. This young woman was placing her trust in him, a complete stranger, because she had nowhere else to turn. "Nobody's going to hurt you," Garrett said firmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to command. "I give you my word on that. What's your name?" "Anna," she whispered. "Anna Whitfield." Garrett recognized the name immediately. The Whitfields were one of Buffalo's more prominent families. They owned the general store and had considerable influence in local politics. But he had never seen this young woman in town, which was strange given the small size of the community. "Anna, I'm Garrett Blackwood. I own the Diamond B Ranch. Can you tell me what happened to you?" Anna's eyes darted nervously toward the road, as if she expected to see pursuers appearing at any moment. They They said I was crazy, said I needed to be taught a lesson about telling lies and causing trouble for decent folks. Who said that? Anna was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with whether to trust him with the truth. Finally, she spoke in a voice so low Garrett had to strain to hear her. My uncle and his friends, they've been hurting me for months. When I tried to tell people, they said I was making it up, that I was touched in the head. So they decided to teach me not to tell stories anymore. Garrett felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm and reassuring. Anna, you're safe now. I'm going to take you somewhere where you can get cleaned up and have something to eat. You don't understand, Anna said, shaking her head frantically. My uncle is Aldrich Whitfield. He owns half the businesses in Buffalo, and he's got friends on the town council. Nobody's going to believe me over him. Garrett had heard of Aldrich Whitfield, a prosperous businessman who presented himself as a pillar of the community, but was rumored to have a cruel streak when crossed. If Anna's accusations were true, she was right to be terrified. Anna, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Garrett said, kneeling down so he was at eye level with her. I don't care who your uncle is or how much influence he has in town. What's been done to you is wrong, and I'm not going to let it continue. Anna searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or false promise. What she saw there, the unwavering determination of a man who had never broken his word, seemed to give her the first real hope she'd felt in months. You really mean that? She whispered. I mean it, Garrett replied. Now, can you ride? My ranch is about 5 miles from here. As Garrett helped Anna to her feet and onto his horse, he found himself thinking about the commitment he had just made. Taking on Aldrich Whitfield would likely bring serious consequences: economic retaliation, social ostracism, possibly even violence. But looking at the bruises on Anna's face and the desperate gratitude in her eyes, Garrett knew he had no choice. The ride back to the Diamond Bee was made in relative silence, with Anna clinging to the saddle horn while Garrett walked alongside his horse. As they approached the ranch buildings, Garrett began mentally preparing for what would likely be the most difficult fight of his life. His housekeeper, Elena Morales, met them at the front door, a woman in her 50s who had worked for Garrett for 6 years. Elena took one look at Anna's condition and immediately began fussing over her, asking no questions, but clearly understanding that the young woman needed care and protection. As Elena led Anna inside to tend to her injuries, Garrett stood on his porch and looked out across the vast expanse of his ranch. He had built this place as a sanctuary, a refuge from the violence and corruption he had encountered during his years as a cavalry officer. Now it seemed that violence had found him anyway. But Garrett Blackwood was not a man who backed down from a fight, especially when the stakes involved protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. As the sun set over the Bighorn Mountains, he began planning how to take on one of the most powerful men in Johnson County. The gathering storm. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with low clouds hanging over the valley like a funeral shroud. Garrett had spent most of the night on his porch, rifle across his knees, watching the approaches to his ranch and thinking about the best way to handle the situation. Inside the house, Elena had worked through the night tending to Anna's injuries. Beyond the obvious facial bruises, there were older wounds, scars on her arms and back that spoke of prolonged abuse, malnutrition that suggested she had been denied adequate food, and a haunted look that indicated psychological trauma. When Garrett finally went inside at dawn, he found Anna sitting at his kitchen table, wearing one of Elena's spare dresses and looking slightly more human than she had the previous afternoon. The swelling around her eye had gone down somewhat, but the bruises were now a spectacular array of purple, blue, and yellow that made Garrett's jaw clench with anger. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked gently, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Better," Anna replied, though her voice still carried the tremor of someone who had been through hell. "Mrs. Morales has been very kind to me." Over the next hour, Anna told her story. Her parents had died in a cholera outbreak 2 years earlier, leaving her in the care of her father's brother, Aldrich Whitfield. At first, Aldrich had seemed like a caring guardian, but within months, his true nature had emerged. It started with small things, Anna explained. He would criticize everything I did, tell me I was worthless. Then he started hitting me when I made mistakes. The worst part was that everyone in town thought he was such a wonderful man for taking in his orphaned niece. Who else was involved? Garrett asked. Anna's face paled. There are 3 men who come to the house regularly. Harold Pemberton, who owns the bank, Marcus Stern, who runs the lumber mill, and Sheriff Augustus Clay. Garrett felt his heart sink. The sheriff being involved changed everything. It meant that Anna couldn't count on protection from the law. "What happened yesterday?" Garrett asked. "Uncle Aldrich said he was tired of my difficult behavior. He said he and his friends had decided I needed to be taught a permanent lesson. They were going to—" Anna's voice broke, and she couldn't finish the sentence. "So you ran," Garrett said. "I waited until they were drunk, then climbed out my bedroom window. I've been hiding in the woods for 2 days." As if summoned by his thoughts, the sound of approaching horses broke the morning silence. Through the kitchen window, Garrett could see 5 riders approaching the main house, led by a man whose expensive suit and commanding bearing marked him as someone accustomed to authority. "That's him!" Anna whispered, her face going white with terror. "That's Uncle Aldrich." Garrett stood up slowly, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol on his hip. "Elena, take Anna upstairs and stay with her. Don't come down no matter what you hear." As the women hurried upstairs, Garrett stepped out onto his front porch to meet his unwelcome visitors. Aldrich Whitfield was indeed an impressive figure, tall, well-dressed, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively defer to his authority. "Mr. Blackwood," Aldrich called out as he dismounted, his voice carrying the smooth tones of a practiced politician. "I hope you'll forgive this early morning intrusion. I'm Aldrich Whitfield, and I believe you may have encountered my niece yesterday." "I might have," Garrett replied carefully. "What can I do for you?" Aldrich smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Anna is a troubled young woman. She's been having difficulties since her parents died. Delusions, wild stories, running away from home. We're very concerned about her mental state." "She seemed lucid enough to me," Garrett said. "Oh, she can be quite convincing when she wants to be. That's part of her condition. She spins these elaborate tales about mistreatment and abuse, trying to gain sympathy from strangers." Sheriff Clay stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun butt. "The point is, she's a danger to herself and others. We need to take her back to town, where she can receive proper care." Garrett looked from Aldrich to the sheriff to the 3 other men, all of whom were watching him with barely concealed hostility. "I'm afraid I can't help you, gentlemen. If this young woman is as disturbed as you claim, then she needs the care of a doctor." Aldrich's mask of civility slipped slightly. "Mr. Blackwood, Anna is my legal ward, and I have every right to retrieve her. Legal guardianship doesn't give you the right to abuse someone under your care." The words hung in the air like gunpowder, and Garrett could see the sudden tension in all 5 men. "That's a very serious accusation," Sheriff Clay said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "Making false charges against upstanding citizens can have serious legal consequences." "So can beating a helpless young woman," Garrett replied evenly. Aldrich's face was turning red with barely controlled rage. "You have no idea what you're meddling with here, Blackwood. Anna is a disturbed, lying little whore who would say anything to avoid responsibility for her actions." The crude language revealed more about Aldrich's true character than hours of testimony could have. Garrett felt his own temper rising, but he kept his voice level. "I think this conversation is over. You're trespassing on my property, and I'd like you to leave." Aldrich stepped closer to the porch, his eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over, Blackwood. You have no idea who you're dealing with or what I'm capable of." "Then I guess we'll find out," Garrett replied. As the 5 men mounted their horses and rode away, Garrett remained on his porch, watching until they disappeared. He understood that he had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in Johnson County. Looking up at the 2nd-story window where Anna was watching, Her face still bearing the marks of systematic abuse, Garrett knew he had made the only choice his conscience would allow. The battle lines drawn within 24 hours of Aldrich Whitfield's visit, Garrett began to understand the full extent of his adversary's power. His regular supplier of grain and feed sent word that they could no longer do business with the Diamond B Ranch due to supply shortages. By the end of the week, 3 other businesses had found excuses to terminate their relationships with Garrett. But the economic pressure was nothing compared to the campaign of rumors that Aldrich orchestrated throughout Buffalo. According to the stories spreading through town, Garrett Blackwood was harboring a mentally unstable young woman who had made false accusations against her devoted guardian. Garrett learned about these rumors from his few remaining allies in town, principally Dr. Harrison Webb, the territory's only physician, and Father Miguel Santos, the priest at the small Catholic church. Webb visited the ranch 3 days after Aldrich's confrontation. "I've examined the girl," he said as they sat on the ranch house porch. "Those injuries are consistent with systematic physical abuse over an extended period. There's no question in my mind that she's been tortured." "Can you testify to that if it comes to a legal proceeding?" Garrett asked. Dr. Webb sighed heavily. "Garrett, Aldrich Whitfield owns the building where I have my practice. He's also the largest contributor to the fund that pays my salary. If I speak out against him publicly, he'll destroy me." Father Santos brought a different perspective when he visited later that week. "My people know about men like Aldrich Whitfield," he told Garrett. "We have seen what happens when powerful men decide they can treat the vulnerable however they wish. This is not just about one young woman. It is about what kind of community we are going to be." Over the following weeks, Garrett began to hear stories about other instances of intimidation and abuse perpetrated by Aldrich and his associates. A Mexican family had been driven off their homestead after refusing to sell their water rights. A small merchant had been forced to close his business. A young cowboy had been severely beaten after allegedly showing disrespect to Sheriff Clay. Meanwhile, Anna was slowly recovering under Elena's care. The bruises on her face faded, she began to gain weight, and most importantly, she started to show signs of the strong, intelligent young woman she had been before months of abuse had broken her spirit. "I want to fight back," she told Garrett one evening. "I'm tired of being afraid, tired of hiding. If we don't stop Uncle Aldrich, he'll just find another victim." "Anna, you don't understand how dangerous this could get." Anna looked up from her book, her eyes blazing with determination. "Mr. Blackwood, there's nothing Aldrich can do to me that's worse than what I've already endured. But now I have something I didn't have before, people who believe me and are willing to help me fight." Garrett was struck by the transformation in the young woman. The terrified, broken girl he had found was gone, replaced by someone who radiated strength and purpose. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "I want to tell my story publicly. I want people to know the truth about what Aldrich Whitfield really is." Over the next several days, Anna and Garrett worked together to document her experiences and gather supporting evidence. Anna wrote out a detailed account of the abuse she had suffered. Elena provided testimony about Anna's physical condition when she arrived at the ranch. Dr. Webb, despite his concerns about retaliation, agreed to write a medical report documenting Anna's injuries. But their most significant breakthrough came from Carlos Mendez, one of Garrett's ranch hands. "My cousin works at the Whitfield house as a servant," Carlos said quietly. "She has seen things, heard things. She is afraid to speak, but if you promise to protect her..." The cousin, Maria Vasquez, was a young woman about Anna's age who had been working as a maid in Aldrich's household for over a year. When she finally agreed to meet with them, her testimony was devastating. "I heard her screaming at night," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "I saw the marks on her arms, the bruises. Senor Whitfield would get drunk and angry, and then he would hurt her. And those men who came to the house, they knew what was happening." "Would you be willing to testify about what you witnessed?" Garrett asked. Maria looked terrified. "If I speak out against Senor Whitfield, he will have me killed, and my family will lose their jobs." What if we could guarantee your protection? Anna asked suddenly. What if we went above the local authorities? What if we took our evidence directly to the territorial government? Garrett felt a spark of hope. Wyoming Territory was still under federal jurisdiction, and the territorial governor had been appointed with a mandate to establish law and order. If they could get their case before territorial authorities, they might be able to bypass Aldrich's local influence. It's worth a try, Garrett said, but it would mean a trip to Cheyenne, and that's a dangerous journey. As they began planning their trip to the territorial capital, none of them realized that Aldrich Whitfield had already learned about their activities through his network of informants. At that very moment, he was planning a final, decisive strike against the people who dared to oppose him. The final stand. The trap was set with military precision. Aldrich Whitfield had spent weeks gathering intelligence about Garrett's activities and plans. When his spies reported that Garrett and Anna were preparing to travel to Cheyenne with evidence against him, Aldrich knew he had to act quickly. On a cold November morning, Garrett was in his barn saddling horses for the journey when Carlos Mendez burst through the doors, his face pale with fear. "Senor Blackwood," Carlos gasped. "They have taken Maria, Sheriff Clay and 3 men. They took her from her family's house in the night." Garrett's blood ran cold. "When?" "2 hours ago. They said she was being arrested for making false statements, but her father thinks they will kill her to keep her from talking." Garrett realized immediately what was happening. Aldrich was eliminating witnesses and using Maria as bait to draw him into a confrontation on Aldrich's terms. Where did they take her? "To the old mining camp up in Devil's Canyon, the one abandoned after the cave-in last year." "Senor, it is a trap. They want you to come after her." Anna appeared in the barn doorway, having overheard the conversation. "We have to save her," she said simply. "This is my fault. If I hadn't asked her to testify—" "This isn't your fault. This is Aldrich showing us what he's capable of when someone threatens his power." "Which is exactly why we can't let him get away with it," Anna replied firmly. "If we abandon Maria now, if we let Aldrich murder her to protect himself, then we're no better than all the other people who looked the other way." Garrett knew she was right, but he also understood the reality of their situation. Devil's Canyon was 15 miles of rough terrain from the ranch, perfect country for an ambush. Aldrich would have chosen the location carefully. "Even if we could get to her, what then? Aldrich has at least 6 men with him, including the sheriff. We'd be outnumbered and outgunned." Anna was quiet for a moment, then looked at Garrett with grim determination. "Not if we weren't alone." Over the next few hours, Anna demonstrated a side of her character that surprised even Garrett. Using her knowledge of Spanish and her connections through Eleanor and the Mexican workers on the ranch, she began organizing a network of people who had been quietly suffering under Aldrich's reign of terror. Father Santos arrived first, bringing with him 5 Mexican ranchers whose families had been threatened by Aldrich's associates. Dr. Webb came next, accompanied by 2 miners who had been cheated by Marcus Stern's lumber mill. Even more surprising was the arrival of 3 cowboys from neighboring ranches, men who had kept silent about Aldrich's abuses, but were finally ready to stand up and fight. By sunset, nearly 20 men had gathered at the Diamond B Ranch, all united by their hatred of Aldrich Whitfield and their determination to end his reign of terror. "This isn't just about rescuing Maria," Father Santos told the assembled group. "This is about whether we're going to be a community ruled by fear or by justice." Garrett looked around at the faces surrounding him and realized that Anna had accomplished something remarkable. She had united people who normally had little in common around a shared sense of moral outrage. They spent the evening planning their assault. The plan was risky, but had the advantage of surprise. At dawn, the rescue party set out for Devil's Canyon, riding hard across the frozen landscape. They split into 3 groups, one to approach from the east, one from the west, and a smaller group led by Garrett to create a diversion at the main entrance. The abandoned mining camp sat in a narrow valley surrounded by rocky walls that rose nearly 100 feet on all sides. As Garrett's group approached the canyon entrance, they could see smoke rising from one of the buildings. Garrett crept forward on foot, using abandoned mining equipment as cover. Through a broken window he could see Maria tied to a chair, her face bruised, but her eyes still defiant. 3 men sat around a table, Sheriff Clay and 2 of Aldrich's hired guns. But where was Aldrich himself? The answer came in the form of a rifle shot that shattered the morning silence. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from Garrett's feet, and Aldrich Whitfield's voice echoed across the canyon from somewhere high on the eastern rim. "Garrett Blackwood, the great defender of the innocent, right on time!" Garrett pressed himself against an old ore cart, his rifle ready. "Let the girl go, Aldrich. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who thinks they can challenge my authority." Aldrich's voice cracked with rage. "You've cost me a great deal of trouble, Blackwood." More shots rang out from the canyon rim, but the gunfire also served as the signal for the other 2 groups to begin their assault. What followed was unlike anything Wyoming Territory had seen since the Indian Wars. Father Santos led his group down the western wall like avenging angels, using ropes and mining cables to descend while laying down covering fire. The eastern group engaged Aldrich's snipers in a running gunfight along the canyon rim. The battle raged for nearly an hour, gunfire echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Gradually, Garrett's superior numbers began to tell. One by one, Aldrich's men were either killed, wounded, or forced to surrender. Sheriff Clay was the last to give up, emerging from the office building with his hands raised. "Don't shoot! I surrender!" But Aldrich Whitfield was not finished. As Garrett moved toward the office to free Maria, Aldrich appeared on a ledge overlooking the main camp, his rifle trained on Anna. "It ends here, Blackwood!" Aldrich shouted. "That lying little whore has destroyed everything I worked for. If I can't have my life back, then she doesn't deserve to live." Time seemed to slow as Aldrich's finger tightened on the trigger. Garrett was too far away to reach Anna in time, and his own rifle wasn't in position for a clear shot. But Maria Vasquez, freed from her bonds by one of the Mexican vaqueros, snatched up a fallen pistol and fired 3 rapid shots at Aldrich's position. The first went wide, the second struck rock near his head, but the third found its mark. Aldrich Whitfield tumbled from the ledge and crashed to the canyon floor. His reign of terror finally ended. In the aftermath, as they tended to the wounded and secured the prisoners, Garrett found himself standing beside Anna as she looked down at Aldrich's lifeless body. "I should feel something," she said quietly. "Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, but I just feel empty." That's because you're not like him," Garrett replied. "You fought back not because you enjoyed violence, but because it was the only way to stop him from hurting other people." The investigation that followed exposed the full extent of Aldrich Whitfield's criminal network. Bank records revealed systematic embezzlement. Witness testimony documented numerous assaults, and physical evidence corroborated years of abuse. But perhaps most importantly, the people of Johnson County had learned that they didn't have to live in fear. The diverse group that had come together to rescue Maria stayed together, forming a citizens' committee that would ensure transparent and honest local government. 6 months later, Anna Whitfield, now Anna Blackwood, having married Garrett in a ceremony performed by Father Santos, stood on the porch of the Diamond B Ranch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Getting involved in all that violence? There might have been another way." Anna leaned against him, her voice firm and clear. "There was no other way, Garrett. Men like Aldrich only understand force. If we hadn't stopped him, he would have kept hurting people until someone else found the courage to stand up to him." She paused, watching as Elena called in 2 Mexican orphans they had taken in after their parents died in a mining accident. "Besides," Anna continued, "look what we built from all that darkness. We have a family, a community that looks out for each other, and a future where children don't have to be afraid." As the stars began to appear in the Wyoming sky, Anna and Garrett stood together on their porch, surrounded by the sounds of their new family and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've fought the good fight and won. The trembling girl who had whispered, "Sir, don't let them hurt me again," was gone, replaced by a strong woman who had helped ensure that no one else would have to make that desperate plea. And the rancher who had answered her call had discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come not from protecting what you have, but from standing up for those who cannot protect themselves. This incredible true story shows us that evil triumphs only when good people refuse to act. Anna Whitfield's desperate plea found the right person at the right moment, someone willing to risk everything to protect the innocent. If this story of courage and justice moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories that prove ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to stand up for what's right. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. Stories like this happened in communities all across America, where regular folks decided that enough was enough. Remember, we all have moments when we hear that desperate whisper for help. When that moment comes for you, I hope you'll remember Garrett Blackwood and find the courage to answer, "Nobody's going to hurt you, not on my watch." Until next time, keep believing in the power of standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves.